This week I am making over this French provincial bookcase. It had a few cracks that needed repairing. The cabinet also had some sort of groove that probably was used for a pair of sliding doors in the past. But the sliding doors are gone, so I am going to fill up the crack and make sure it will look like it was never there. So first things first, I grabbed a bit of wood filler to fill up the crack that had become useless over the years, since the sliding doors have disappeared on this bookcase. The plan for this makeover is that I am going to use the dry brushing technique, and on the sides of the cabinet I will be doing a faded stencil. In the end I'll do some beautiful shading which will bring the whole look together. Once the wood filler had dried completely, I sanded everything smooth with my sander. I started with a 120 grit sandpaper and then gradually worked my way up to a higher grit. I think I ended with a 200 grit sandpaper. When you gradually increase your grit, you will have a smoother result. I wiped away all the sanding dust outside, and then I took the bookcase inside. Before I started painting, I gave the piece a thorough wash, making sure all the dust and grime was gone so my paint would stick better to the surface. The top of the cabinet was loose, so I decided to take it off before painting. It would make it a bit easier to get into all the corners of the backboard. Since autumn is kicking in here in Belgium, I wanted to go for some warm and earthy tones. I chose the colors Honfleur, Coco and Country Grey from the Annie Sloan chalk paint range. For the base coat I used Honfleur. Honfleur is a dark brown color and is named after the harbour town in Normandy. This chalk paint color is inspired by the rich warm brown found in the rustic French countryside, as well as a mid-century modern design. I used a big flat brush for my base coat and painted in no specific direction. I don't want my paint to be smooth. It can have a bit of texture. Since I'm going for a rustic look, it doesn't matter if you'll see brush strokes once the paint is dry. The more texture, the better, but I'm not over texturing either. Once I was ready with my base coat, I wrapped my brush in a bit of plastic foil. This will keep the paint in the brush moist, so you don't need to wash it in between coats. When you're working with a brown color, I can guarantee you that your first coat will look kind of ugly, as you can see here. But as always, trust the process. After my base coat had dried, I removed the plastic foil from my brush again and I could start with my second coat. I didn't film this part, since I think that would be a bit boring. So let's skip this part and jump right over to the next step. In this second step I am going to dry brush the color Coco on top of the base coat. I take a bit of paint with my brush. I then unload it on a piece of cardboard and start painting. I want the color of my base coat to peek through a bit. First I started quite light, but then I decided I wanted more of the cocoa in the center of the piece. On the edges I used less paint and pressure, so you can see the dark brown color peek through. I repeated this process on the rest of the piece until the whole surface was covered with a peek-through layer of cocoa. After I finished dry brushing with the color Coco, I grabbed my can of Honfleur again. With the same technique, I took a bit of paint on a smaller brush, unloaded it on a piece of cardboard, and then dry brushed a bit of the brown color on all the edges and in the corners. Where I thought I went too heavy with the brown color, I just covered it again with Coco, always using the same dry brushing technique. You will find yourself going back and forth for a little while, jumping from one color to the other, until you are satisfied with the result. Here you can see the subtle difference this extra step of dry brushing in the corners gives the piece. I didn't do the extra step on the lower part yet, only on the top. It's just a subtle difference, but it is definitely there. With a small flat brush, I did the same thing on the doors. I dry brushed a bit of dark brown on the lower parts of the details, in all corners and on all the edges. Then I blended everything in again by dry brushing some of the color Coco on top. Again, you can see the subtle difference after this extra step. The door on the left only has one base coat of Honfleur and one coat of dry brushed Coco. The one on the right has gotten the extra step of blending the colors together using the dry brushing technique, going back and forth between both colors. I kept repeating these steps on the rest of the piece, including the other door, the panel behind the shelf itself, and the top of the cabinet. It definitely takes a bit of time to go over the entire surface once more, but I promise you it will be worth it. Once that was all done, it was time to put on the stencil. I started by taping off the edges, making sure the stencil wouldn't be off-centered. Then I taped the stencil on the cabinet as well. You don't need to tape the stencil on, you can just hold it up by hand. But since I will be using a stippling motion to get my paint on, it would be much more risky that my stencil wouldn't stay in place. I am using a very old oval brush that has lost many of its bristles after years and years of furniture flipping. It's kind of stiff, which is ideal when you want to go for a faded stencil look. Like the dry brushing technique, I am always unloading a bit of my paint on a piece of cardboard, and then I stipple my paint on. Since you're using only a little of the paint, you won't be covering the stencil evenly, but that is exactly what you want. When I was done with my coat of Honfleur, I added a bit of country grey, which is a cool, soft and neutral color. I took a small stencil brush and stippled just a tiny little bit of the second color in a few places. This lighter color on some parts of the stencil will give it a more aged look, like the piece was sun damaged on certain places. Since the stencil was a bit too small and didn't cover the complete side panel, I went in again with a bit of Honfleur for the bottom part. The most satisfying part of stenciling, of course, is removing the tape, but we're not done yet with our faded stencil. Next, I sanded the complete stencil with a sanding sponge. This will already give it a more faded look. But for a little bit of extra fading, I went in again with a bit of Coco, using once again the dry brushing technique. I only used a little bit of Coco to cover parts of the stencil, but if you want an even more faded look, you could of course dry brush more of the color Coco on top. So here is how my faded stencil looked after all these steps. I just love it. It looks so naturally aged, like the stencil has been on this piece for ages. I repeated the same process on the bottom part and also on the other side of the cabinet. I actually also did some stenciling on the doors, but after I completed one door, I thought it just was a bit too much. So I covered it all again with Coco and figured the saying is right. Sometimes less is more. To finish everything off, I did some minor touch-ups with the color Coco on the complete piece, in places where I thought the dark brown color was too present. I protected the whole piece with some clear wax. I put on the wax with a wax brush and then wiped away the excess with a cloth. And for my very last step, I used some black wax. When I first started flipping furniture in 2016, I hated the waxing part. But today, it's one of my favorite things with furniture flipping. I love how you can add extra shading to your pieces with just a little bit of black wax. I think it's almost like magic. With a small flat brush, I put some black wax in all the corners and edges, and then I wiped away the excess with a lint-free cloth. What will remain is a faded look that will give your piece a bit of extra dimension and character. I made sure I didn't miss any edge or corner with my black wax. In a minute I will show you the difference between these two doors, when one of them has had the magic of the clear and black wax and the other hasn't. Always make sure that you use two different cloths for each wax. If you mix them up and you would use your cloth with which you have wiped away your black wax for removing some clear wax, you will end up with black stains on places where you most probably don't want them. But if you would mix them up and this would happen to you, don't worry, you can always remove black wax with a bit of clear wax. I am honestly in love with the faded textured look in all these little details. So here is the difference between the two doors. Isn't it amazing? And we are done. So here is just a quick reminder of how this bookcase used to look like. And here is how it looks now. I like how the edges and corners all look so naturally faded, as does the stencil. I love the earthy and neutral tones of this piece. The dry brushing technique definitely added structure and depth to the piece. And the black wax, yes, it surely worked its magic again. The whole piece looks warm, rustic and elegant. It will most definitely complement the coziness in someone's home. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up or subscribe for more videos. I hope to see you again soon. Bye!